just one shift and accidentally picks up the wrong man from the airport. But she has no idea who he really is. Subscribe and write where you're watching this video from. The late afternoon sun painted the Los Angeles sky in streaks of tangerine and muted gold, casting long shadows across the pavement outside LAX. Inside the arrivals terminal, the bustle of travelers, echoing luggage wheels, and the occasional joyful cry of reunion swirled together into a familiar airport symphony. For most, this was just another day. For Leah Hamilton, however, it was her first trial. She stood awkwardly by the row of private driver signs, a hastily printed piece of paper clenched between her fingers, the name Jason Smith written in bold black letters. The cap on her head felt slightly too tight, her borrowed blazer slightly too big, and her nerves were coiled tight beneath her skin. She wasn't a driver. She was a design student in her fourth and final year at West Los Angeles School of Architecture, juggling late-night studio sessions, part-time jobs, and mounting rent. Replacing her cousin Amara today wasn't supposed to be a big deal, just a quick, harmless airport pickup. But standing there amid the chaos, she felt as if the task loomed larger than she expected. Amara had begged her for the favor 2 nights ago. He's just some big-time executive, Jason Smith, flew in from London. Just grab him at Terminal B and take him to the Metro Lux on Wilshire. He'll probably be too busy texting investors to even look at you. The promise was simple. Quick money, easy task, no mistakes. Leah had laughed then, agreeing without hesitation. But now, watching dozens of people stream past her, she felt her confidence crumble like the cheap heel of her thrift store shoes. Her phone buzzed again. She fumbled it out of her pocket, unlocking the screen to read the message from Amara one more time. BA 268. Terminal B, 5:40 p.m. Tall white guy. Suit. Looks like money. Don't screw it up. Leah exhaled sharply and glanced around. 5:43 p.m. People poured out of the international arrivals gate in waves, all looking vaguely important. She gripped the sign tighter, unsure whether to hold it higher or look less conspicuous. Did CEOs usually spot their names and wave, or did they just assume the driver knew them by aura? She had expected him to walk straight up to her, maybe with an assistant or someone on the phone, irritated and jet-lagged. But 10 minutes passed, then 15. Still no one. The name Jason Smith was hardly unique. Half the terminal could probably claim it. She began to pace, chewing her lower lip as anxiety crept up her spine. Then she saw him. He stood alone by the curb, a single navy duffel bag slung over one shoulder, his posture relaxed in a way that seemed practiced. Tall, with sandy blonde hair slightly tousled, he wore a tailored navy jacket over dark jeans, and although the sun was dipping fast, he still wore sunglasses. There was something self-contained about him, unbothered, like someone who had mastered the art of waiting without waiting. Their eyes met for a brief moment. He gave a nod. Leah's heart thumped. Could that be him? He looked like money, clean-cut, elegant without effort. She approached him hesitantly. "Mr. Smith?" she asked, lifting the sign slightly as she neared. He removed his sunglasses slowly, eyes meeting hers with an unreadable expression. Then a small, polite smile curved his lips. "I am Jason," he said, "and I believe I'm in need of a ride." That was enough for Leah. She exhaled in relief, quickly offering to take his bag. He let her, though she noticed the weight was more than she expected. Together, they walked in silence to the car parked at the edge of the pickup lane. Sliding into the driver's seat, Leah started the engine and tapped the destination into the GPS. She stole a quick glance at him through the rearview mirror. He sat calmly, gazing out the window, his fingers resting on his thigh with a kind of meditative stillness. He didn't look at his phone, didn't speak, just watched the city move past. "Heading to Metro, Lux?" she asked, just to be sure. "Sure," he replied evenly. "Let's see where the road takes us." She hesitated at the vagueness of his answer, but pulled into traffic anyway. Maybe rich people didn't worry about specific addresses. Maybe they were just used to being chauffeured and trusted the world to align itself accordingly. The first few minutes were heavy with silence. Leia concentrated on the road, trying not to seem awkward or green. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel, and every time she glanced at the mirror, he was still just sitting there, serene and observant. She started to relax, only just, until a new message buzzed across her phone screen. She waited until a red light to glance at it. "Where are you? Jason Smith is still at Terminal B. He just called me. Did you leave without him?" The words didn't register at first. Her breath caught. She read the message again, slower this time. The color drained from her face. Her fingers went numb. She peeked at the man in the back seat. He was now lightly tapping a rhythm against the armrest, totally unaware. Her heart pounded in her ears. She had taken the wrong Jason Smith. Panic surged through her veins like ice water. Without saying a word, she flicked on her turn signal and veered onto a quieter side street. She pulled into the shade of a eucalyptus tree and stopped the car. Her voice shook as she turned around. Mr. Smith," she began, eyes wide with embarrassment. I think I picked up the wrong person." He raised an eyebrow slightly, more amused than surprised. "What do you mean?" She stammered. "There's another Jason Smith, the one I was assigned to pick up. I just got a message. He's still at the terminal. I'm really sorry. This is my first time doing this, and I saw you and assumed—" The man chuckled softly. "You thought I was the other Jason Smith." She nodded quickly, mortified. "I can call someone to come get you, or I can take you wherever you need to go." He tilted his head thoughtfully. "Well, technically, I am Jason. So you weren't completely wrong." Her mouth dropped open, unsure how to respond. "I'm not your Jason Smith," he added, "but I'm definitely a Jason Smith." She gave a short, nervous laugh. "You're taking this surprisingly well." "I'm not in a hurry," he said, glancing out the window. "Just flew in from London. A little detour might be exactly what I need." Leia blinked. This was not how it was supposed to go. She should have been back on the freeway by now, halfway to dropping off a high-ranking client who probably wouldn't even remember her name. Instead, she was on a quiet street with a man she wasn't supposed to pick up, who seemed oddly comfortable with the whole mistake. Still flustered, she opened the rideshare app and called Amara's friend Kara to pick up the actual client. "I really, really messed up," she whispered when Kara answered. "Can you go to Terminal B right now? There's a Jason Smith still waiting. I picked up the wrong one." Kara promised she'd handle it. Leia ended the call and turned back to her passenger. "I'm really sorry. I don't even know how I—" "It's fine," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "Honestly, I'm Jason Smith, CEO of Whitmore Concepts. Not your guy, but still someone who needed a ride." Leia's jaw tensed. Whitmore Concepts was a major name in sustainable urban design and modular construction. She'd studied one of their projects in class last year. The realization crashed into her like a wave. "You're that Jason Smith?" He nodded once, a small, almost sly smile appearing. "I am." The breath left her lungs, and just like that, what began as a mistake started to feel like the beginning of something else. Leia wasn't sure how she managed to merge back onto the freeway without crashing into a median. Her fingers trembled faintly against the steering wheel, and though her face betrayed little, a storm raged behind her composed expression. The man, Jason Smith, though not the one she had been assigned, sat comfortably in the back seat, legs crossed, one hand resting loosely on his knee. He gazed out the window, unhurried, detached from the chaos he had unknowingly walked into. His presence didn't demand attention, but it held it nonetheless. Every time she glanced in the rearview mirror, she caught the glint of quiet thought behind his gaze, as though he were observing the world with practiced detachment, like a man used to making sense of complex puzzles. Leia had made a mistake, an enormous one, and she couldn't wrap her head around how easily he had accepted it. She hadn't just picked up the wrong man. She had accidentally driven off with the CEO of one of the most innovative urban design firms in the country. That fact alone should have sent her spiraling into full-blown panic, but instead it only deepened the surreal quality of the moment. The man didn't ask to be dropped off. He didn't complain or criticize. He seemed to welcome the misdirection, as though he'd been waiting for an excuse to drift from his prescribed path. The traffic began to thicken as they neared downtown, brake lights stretching before them like a red ribbon under the sinking sun. The sky had dimmed to a dusty lavender, the gold of the afternoon slipping quietly into the shadows of approaching evening. Leia kept her eyes on the road, jaw tight, as the silence stretched longer than it should have. She wanted to say something, anything, to break the tension she was imagining, except he didn't seem tense at all. Eventually, curiosity got the better of her. "So, London?" she asked, clearing her throat as naturally as she could. He looked up from the window, his face unreadable for a moment. "Yes, just got back. Meetings mostly. It's been a long month." Leia nodded, trying not to let her nerves creep back in. "First time in L.A.? He chuckled lightly. "Hardly. I used to live here before the company expanded, but I haven't driven through the city like this in years. It's changed." She smiled faintly. "It has. Some parts for the better. Others, not so much." Jason leaned slightly forward, his eyes catching hers in the mirror. "And you? You're a student?" The question caught her off guard. She hadn't mentioned that. Her heart jumped a beat. He gestured to the front seat where her canvas backpack rested, the edge of a sketchpad peeking from its zipper. "Design sketches. And the way you scanned the freeway exits earlier? Like you were mapping something invisible." She laughed quietly, then winced. "Guilty. I'm studying architecture. Final year. Between classes and work, I drive sometimes, though clearly not well." "I wouldn't say that," he said. "You're just not used to being wrong. That's a good sign for a designer." She turned her head just enough to give him a skeptical look. "Pretty sure this whole mix-up qualifies as wrong." He smiled without smugness. "Maybe, but not all mistakes are failures. Sometimes they're just redirections." Leia didn't answer. Her thoughts were already chasing themselves, spiraling backward through her chaotic day. Her decision to help Amara, her desperate need for money to pay for printing her final mock-ups. She hadn't even wanted to be here. She had almost said no. But then the idea of another shift at the cafe, or another late-night folding brochures for the campus events office, had made her choose the unknown. She stole another glance at him. There was something enigmatic in the way he carried himself. Not arrogance, something more deliberate, like someone who saw more than he let on, and now that she knew who he really was, she couldn't help but feel the weight of his presence. Jason Whitmore. She had read about him in an article last semester. A quiet visionary, known for buying undeveloped urban lots and transforming them into modular green spaces. He wasn't flashy. He didn't flaunt wealth, but his company had reshaped parts of Brooklyn, Chicago, and most recently Atlanta, turning forgotten industrial zones into homes, parks, libraries, spaces that breathed. The realization that she'd accidentally scooped him into her beat-up Honda Civic felt surreal. That kind of thing didn't happen in real life. Jason leaned back in his seat, watching the shadows play across the skyline. So, architecture, that's not a small ambition. No, Leia admitted, but it's what I love. It's hard sometimes, trying to keep up. Everyone's always chasing the next trend, the next innovation. Sometimes I just want to design something that feels like rest. He raised an eyebrow. Rest? Yeah, she said, her voice quieter now. Like when someone walks into a room and they finally exhale without knowing why. Not because the furniture's fancy or the colors are perfect, but because something about the space lets them be. I want to create that. Jason didn't respond immediately. Instead, he sat back, his expression unreadable again. Leia thought she had said too much, that she had veered into the poetic, the idealistic realm professors warned against. But then he said, "That's not a philosophy I hear much in boardrooms." Leia blinked. "You spend a lot of time in boardrooms?" He chuckled. "Too much." They rode in silence for a few more minutes, the car creeping past the Civic Center, then through the edge of the Arts District. The buildings here were old, cracked, still bearing the bones of a forgotten era. Murals covered some walls, others were wrapped in scaffolding and wire fencing. Gentrification was moving through like a slow tide, claiming what it could, reshaping the rest. As they reached a red light on Broadway, Leia pointed out the passenger side window. That one. Built in 1928. It's been through 5 renovations and they keep slapping fake paneling over the original tiles. Underneath that aluminum siding, there's a mosaic that was designed by a woman who never even signed her name to the project. She was one of the first black female architects in the state. Jason turned to look. His gaze lingered longer than most would have. "You know your history." "I know stories worth saving," she replied. "If I had the budget, I'd strip it down and bring the original design back. Expose the materials. Let the building speak." He nodded once. "You see layers?" She smiled, surprised at the compliment. "Yeah, that's the word I always use. I see stories layered into walls. I want to uncover them." The conversation might have ended there, another pleasant exchange with a stranger, a shared appreciation for architecture. But Jason didn't let it drift away. Instead, he studied her through the mirror, his eyes sharp now, focused. Leia felt a shift in the car, a pause she couldn't name. Her chest tightened slightly, and she didn't know why. When they pulled up to the entrance of the Grand Arcadia Hotel, she parked the car and stepped out to help him with his bag. The valet glanced at her curiously, but said nothing. As she opened the trunk, a folded piece of paper slipped from her open backpack and landed on the pavement, unnoticed. "Thanks again," she said, offering a sheepish smile. "And sorry for the mix-up." Before Jason could respond, she was already stepping back into the car, flustered and eager to disappear. The door closed behind her and the car pulled away. He looked down, noticing the paper at his feet. He picked it up carefully. It was a sketch, a modular shelving design, curved to fold into the structure of a wall, the lines elegant but practical. Black ink, warm graphite. The concept was fully formed, the execution surprisingly mature. His eyes narrowed. He flipped it over. There in the corner were 2 letters. Faint. Stylized. L.H. Jason stood still for a long moment, his mind turning like a key in a hidden lock. Then, without a word, he folded the paper gently and slid it into his inner jacket pocket. The mistake had led him exactly where he needed to be, and he wasn't going to leave it at that. Jason sat in his hotel suite long after the city's noises had quieted into a low, constant murmur. The lights from passing cars slid across the walls in soft pulses, broken occasionally by the hum of an elevator or the clink of glass from the hallway bar cart making its rounds. He hadn't moved in nearly half an hour, his duffel bag unopened at the foot of the bed, his blazer folded neatly across the back of a nearby chair. In front of him, on the small glass table beside the window, lay a single sheet of paper, Leia's sketch. He had unfolded it gently, smoothing the creases with deliberate fingers, staring at the familiar curves of the design, with the kind of focus reserved for old memories resurrected without warning. He had seen it before. Not this exact sheet of paper, but the lines. The modular design that folded into the wall, the subtle curvature that blended functionality with warmth, the quiet brilliance of a solution that didn't call attention to itself. 3 years ago, he had purchased a concept like this through a private design auction. It had been an anonymous submission, labeled simply Horizon. It stood out then not because it was revolutionary, but because it was human, quiet, useful, timeless. And he remembered with uncanny clarity how he had approved the acquisition himself. He had done so with a specific instruction. The design was not to be rushed to production. It needed time. It needed care. It needed someone who understood it. Instead, somewhere along the way, it had been stolen. Jason had trusted an intermediary agency to hold the rights. That agency, in turn, had collaborated with a smaller firm, Vinton & Co., to begin prototyping. Vinton's creative director had assured them that the process was in capable hands. But, less than a year later, without notice, the concept had resurfaced under a new name. Eclipse. The same base structure, the same folding system, but dressed in sharper lines, made colder, made fashionable. The warmth was gone. The heart of the design had been gutted, and now here he was, staring at the original hand that had drawn it. A young architecture student. A woman who had no idea her quiet dream had been turned into a profit machine by someone she once trusted. Jason didn't sleep that night. Instead, he pulled up his laptop and began searching. His company's archives still held the original bid record for the Horizon concept. It had been uploaded under the initials LH. The timestamp matched the final round of college design showcases from 3 years ago. And there, at the bottom of the archived contract, was the signed agreement for prototype delegation to Caleb Vinton. Jason exhaled slowly, eyes narrowing. The same Caleb Vinton who was credited with the Eclipse launch. The same Caleb she had mentioned in the car just once, in passing. My ex used to say I dreamed too much. Jason didn't need more than that. Everything clicked into place. The following morning, he composed an email. It was brief, friendly, intentionally vague. He invited Leia to attend an upcoming client preview for one of his company's new showrooms, claiming he needed an outside eye to give quick feedback on flow, lighting, general atmosphere. Nothing formal, just a casual opportunity. He didn't mention the sketch. He didn't mention Horizon. He didn't mention Vinton. The reply came the next evening. Sure, I could stop by. Leia's message was cautious, but not dismissive. She hadn't expected to hear from him again. Not really. And when his email landed in her inbox, she'd stared at it for 5 full minutes before opening it. Something about his tone felt sincere, not transactional. It wasn't the voice of a man trying to leverage a mistake. It was someone offering something without strings. That confused her more than anything. The showroom was located inside the International Interior Expo, a massive, rotating installation downtown that hosted emerging technologies, luxury brands, and sustainable design features. Leia had walked past it a dozen times, but never once stepped inside. She didn't think she belonged. Her ID badge, issued by Jason's office, granted her full access. She hesitated at the entrance, smoothing her hair and shifting her weight anxiously before stepping through the glass doors into a world that pulsed with ambition. The space was cavernous and glowing, glass installations twisted upward toward skylights. Sleek partitions hung from steel tracks. Projectors illuminated floating diagrams mid-air. Models of homes, offices, kitchens, and libraries towered on rotating platforms. It felt like standing inside the mind of the future. Jason met her near the entrance, dressed far less formally than she remembered. No suit, no blazer, just a gray shirt, sleeves rolled up, and dark trousers that looked worn at the knees. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he offered a smile and gestured for her to follow. They walked in silence for a few minutes, weaving through the structures. Leia tried to keep her breathing even, but her nerves danced in her chest like live wires. Then he led her toward a polished white archway labeled Eclipse, the Future of Modular Living. And everything inside her stopped. There, arranged beneath elegant lighting, stood the physical manifestation of her sketch. The same curvature. The same shelving that folded in without mechanical strain. The same layered concept she had drawn once on the floor of her dorm room, barefoot and hungry, sketching with a mechanical pencil and an unsteady hand. Even the detail on the lower corners, the beveled edge she'd added for light scattering, was there. Brushed into steel, branded, marketed, sold. She didn't speak. Couldn't. Jason remained beside her, watching her face rather than the exhibit. He saw the shift in her jaw, the way her shoulders straightened without lifting, the quiet closing of her eyes for just a moment longer than a blink. "This is mine," she said, barely audible. He nodded once, slowly. Yes. She didn't look at him. Her voice shook as she whispered, "He told me it wasn't practical, that no client would pay for it. He told me to stop designing like a dreamer." Jason didn't interrupt. Leia's eyes began to sting. "He said no one would remember something that simple." "I remembered," Jason said quietly. She turned toward him, confused, heart pounding. "What?" "I bought the design," he said, 3 years ago, through a closed submission. I didn't know it was yours until that drive." Leia stared at him as though seeing him for the first time. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I wasn't sure," he replied, "and because I knew once you saw it for yourself, you'd know what I know." She looked away, emotions warring beneath her skin. Shame, rage, grief, gratitude. They collided inside her like freight trains on a single track. Later, they sat in her car again, parked in a shadowed corner of a nearby structure, the city lights flickering in fractured reflections across the windshield. Neither spoke for a long time. She held the steering wheel, even though the engine was off, her knuckles pale. "I gave him everything," she said finally. "My sketches, my ideas. I thought if I stayed quiet, I'd be safe." Jason didn't look at her, but his voice was low and certain. "You weren't wrong to trust. You were just too kind to expect cruelty." Her hand left the wheel and dropped into her lap, fingers curling around the hem of her coat. "What do I do now?" she asked. He turned to her slowly. "That depends. Do you want justice?" Her throat constricted. She met his eyes. "I want my name back." Jason nodded once, the answer he'd hoped for clear in her voice. When Leia returned home that night, her apartment felt different. Not smaller, she'd always known it was small, but heavier. The walls that once felt comforting now pressed inward, crammed with memories she didn't want to carry. She walked past her kitchenette, past the milk crate bookshelf, into her room where her desk waited, cluttered with sketch pads and broken pens and a lamp that flickered when she exhaled too hard. Something lay on the floor just inside the door. An envelope, no stamp, no name. She crouched down slowly, picking it up with the careful hands. Inside was an old, crinkled sheet of lined paper, torn at the corner. It showed a rough sketch of an adjustable desk that folded into a chair. The drawing was awkward, wobbly, off balance. But there was something honest in the way the proportions tried to hold. At the bottom, written in steady black ink, was a note. "I once thought this was useless. Someone believed in me anyway, so I kept designing. Today, I believe in you." Leia pressed the paper to her chest and closed her eyes. There was more in the envelope. A printed email thread, scanned and yellowing, a timestamp from 3 years ago, a record of the Horizon submission, the bid, the purchase, all traced back to her initials, LH. He hadn't sent it to accuse her, or even to push her. He'd sent it to give her the truth, and to let her decide what to do with it. Leia didn't sleep that night. Her apartment, which had always been a modest haven of books, sketches, and quiet, now felt like a cage of unfinished conversations. The envelope with the sketch and the email thread rested on her desk, slightly curled at the edges as if it too held its breath. She stared at it long after midnight, replaying every detail of the past 72 hours in loops that wouldn't break. There had been a time when she could disappear into her drawings, when the world outside stopped pressing on her ribs. But now, every line she'd ever traced felt like a question with no safe answer. She turned on her phone around 3 a.m. and found a message from her former classmate, Sarah. Just 3 words. Is it true? No context, no punctuation, just a mirror of the whisper already circling inside her head. Leia didn't reply. By morning, her inbox had swelled with a dozen similar messages, some curious, some supportive, a few suspicious. Her name had been mentioned in a forum where architecture students shared blueprints and internship tips. Someone had found a screenshot of the Eclipse showroom from the expo and paired it with a 3-year-old student showcase brochure. Her name had been listed there beneath a mock-up titled Horizon. The caption had described her work as quietly radical, a phrase one professor had used and she had never forgotten. She hadn't posted anything publicly yet. She wasn't sure she wanted to. A part of her, the quieter part, still hoped this could be solved gently. She could confront Caleb in private. She could explain what had happened and demand her name be added, nothing more. Just a footnote of credit. A line at the bottom of a press release. Something to mark that she had been there. But the other part of her, the one that remembered the countless nights she'd given up sleep, the internships she never got, the grants she'd been overlooked for, the way Caleb had called her too academic and not marketable. That part didn't want quiet. That part wanted clarity. The following day, she met Jason at a small cafe tucked between a bookstore and an old train station. The tables were uneven, the chairs all mismatched, and the coffee came in chipped ceramic mugs with names written on the sides in black marker. It was the kind of place that didn't pretend to be anything but what it was. She liked it immediately. Jason sat near the window, wearing the same worn coat from the expo. He stood when she entered, but didn't reach for her, didn't offer anything but a calm nod and the hint of a smile that said he wasn't going to push. They sat in silence for a minute before he said, "I didn't bring you here for answers." Leia looked down at her mug. It read, "Elaine," in a shaky hand. Then, why? To make sure you knew you didn't owe anyone an apology for being right. She didn't speak, but her hand curled tighter around the cup. He added, "I'm not asking you to fight. I'm just asking you not to disappear." That evening, she returned home and opened a blank document. For a long time, she didn't type anything. Her fingers hovered above the keys like birds, unsure where to land. Then, slowly, one by one, she uploaded the original sketch of Horizon. Then, the napkin drawing she had taken a photo of during finals week, the one she'd kept even after the ink began to blur. Then, a 10-second clip from a class video where she'd explained the importance of natural light and multi-use spaces. She didn't tag anyone. She didn't accuse. She simply wrote, 3 years ago, I drew this while sitting on the floor of my apartment, dreaming of spaces that healed. I submitted it anonymously because I was afraid it wouldn't be taken seriously. I stopped drawing for a while when someone told me it wasn't practical, but yesterday I saw my design displayed with someone else's name on it. I'm not here to argue, I just want to show what it looked like when it was born." She hit post. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the numbers began to climb. Shares, likes, comments, hundreds by midnight, thousands by dawn. Messages flooded in from students, teachers, even strangers. Some told her they had followed her work since undergrad. Others said they recognized the soft curvature in the eclipse design, that they had wondered who the original artist had been. Architects and designers she had only ever admired from a distance were now commenting, asking questions, offering support. She read every message. She replied to almost none. The support felt overwhelming. Warm, yes, but heavy too, like a blanket that could suffocate if you didn't shift beneath it. Her story was no longer hers alone. It was public, interpreted, dissected, and it wasn't long before the backlash started. Anonymous accounts called her a liar, a bitter ex, a desperate student trying to leverage someone else's success. Some said she was attacking a respected designer out of jealousy. Others accused her of faking the sketches entirely. The statement from Vinton and Company arrived 2 days later. It was cold and clinical. The recent claims being circulated online are not only inaccurate, but a blatant attempt to tarnish the reputation of our creative team. The Eclipse collection was developed in-house with all appropriate documentation and rights. We stand by our designers and the integrity of their work. No mention of Leia by name. No denial that a concept called Horizon had once existed. Just enough to discredit her without fully addressing her. She stared at the email until her eyes blurred. Then she stopped eating. She stopped replying to messages. She stopped sketching. The board of the International Young Designers Competition emailed her next. Their wording was gentle, but the meaning was not. Given the ongoing controversy, we understand if you prefer to withdraw your name from consideration. Please notify us of your decision by Friday. She read it 3 times, then moved it to a folder marked pending. The worst part was how familiar it felt. The whispers, the half-smiles, the way people looked at her now, not with admiration or even pity, but with hesitation, as if being near her might get them caught in a storm they didn't want to name. She tried to go to a panel discussion she had RSVP'd for weeks ago. It was hosted by a nonprofit she admired, focused on architecture and justice, two things she had once believed always belonged together. But as soon as she walked in, she felt the shift in the room. Heads turned, voices paused mid-sentence. Someone smiled at her, but it didn't reach their eyes. Another whispered into the ear of a colleague, not even bothering to hide it. She left before the second speaker took the stage. Outside, the sky had opened. Rain poured down in sheets, drenching her coat before she could even cross the sidewalk. Her boot slipped against the concrete, and just as her foot hit a slick patch near the curb, she lost her balance. Strong arms caught her. Jason's face appeared above her, rain sliding into his eyes, hair plastered to his forehead. He didn't say anything. He didn't ask if she was okay. He just pulled her gently to her feet and guided her beneath the shallow awning of a closed bakery next door. They stood there in silence, soaked but still. Leia's chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. Her fingers trembled slightly. She wanted to speak, to explain why she had left the panel, why she hadn't called, why the posts had slowed and her inbox had gone silent. But Jason didn't press her. He didn't need her to perform her pain. He just stood beside her, unmoving. Eventually, she exhaled, long and slow, and felt something shift, not outside in the storm, but inside her ribs. That night, when she returned to her apartment, there was a small package waiting on her doorstep. Inside was a pair of dark leather gloves, sleek, elegant, almost identical to the ones Jason had worn the first day they met. Beneath them was a handwritten note. When you're driving through a storm, the most important thing isn't the road. It's the hands that don't let go of the wheel. She read it twice before placing the gloves beside her sketchbook. The next morning, she turned on her laptop, opened the email from the competition board, and began typing. I would like to confirm my participation. She paused, then added, not because I need to prove anyone wrong, but because I'm finally ready to drive my own story. When she hit send, the noise in her head quieted for the first time in days. Not because the storm had passed, but because she was holding the wheel. The morning after she confirmed her participation in the International Young Designers Competition, Leia woke with a strange clarity. Not peace, she was far from that, but a sharp-edged calmness, like the eye of a hurricane hovering between destruction and stillness. Her room was dim, lit only by the early gray of a cloud-covered sky leaking through the slats of her blinds. The gloves sat where she had left them, folded atop her sketchbook, the note tucked beneath. She didn't touch them. Not yet. She needed to prove to herself that she could keep going without relying on symbols of comfort, even ones given with care. Her phone had filled with new messages overnight. The post she'd made about her design, her voice, her right to tell her story, had continued to ripple. The numbers weren't just rising, they were multiplying. Her words had been quoted in 2 design blogs, picked up by a small newsletter focused on underrepresented creators in the field, and screenshotted with praise across multiple social media platforms. But alongside the applause came a louder, uglier wave. She opened one message out of habit, regretting it instantly. If you were really the designer, why did you wait this long to say anything? Another read, funny how your story appears just in time for a competition spot. The next simply said, "Maybe you're just jealous your ex succeeded without you." She scrolled down, skipping over them until her eyes landed on a message from someone she didn't know. The subject line read, "Thank you." Inside was a note from a young architecture student in New Jersey explaining how her own design had once been altered by a professor and presented as part of a school collaboration without her consent. She wrote that Leia's post gave her the courage to confront the department, that she hadn't realized how much she'd internalized the silence. Leia stared at the message for a long time, then whispered aloud, "Okay." Not to the girl or to the screen, but to herself. Just one word of acknowledgement, of fragile affirmation. Then she closed her laptop and went back to work. She didn't go to campus that day. Instead, she stayed home, spreading her mock-ups across the floor, revisiting the renderings she had nearly deleted. She began refining the horizon concept, adjusting minor details she had once been told were unnecessary. She made them bolder. She made them hers. Later that afternoon, a courier arrived with a flat package wrapped in brown paper and tied with a piece of string. There was no sender name, no return address. The tag on the twine said only, "You always had value. This is just the world catching up." Inside was a printed invoice, a real one, dated 3 years ago. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. Purchase confirmation, private design exchange. Buyer, Blake Whitmore. Seller, EM Design. She gasped. EM Design had been her anonymous freelance handle in college, used when she submitted to open calls late at night, never believing anything would come of it. She remembered that submission. She had uploaded the horizon concept half an hour before the deadline, after debating whether it was too personal, too soft, too idealistic. She had never heard back, assumed it had disappeared like so many others. And yet, here it was. A confirmation, quiet and complete. Folded beside it was a note written in the same bold, clean handwriting she had now come to associate with Jason. "You thought the world didn't see you. But I did. I kept this as a reminder that brilliance comes even in silence. Now it's time for the world to know your name." Leia pressed her fingertips to her lips, overwhelmed by the weight of it. It wasn't a gift. It was proof, not a favor. Recognition. The next morning, she walked into a building she had only seen in press releases. It was a sleek structure of concrete and recycled glass with floor-to-ceiling windows and an open-air mezzanine that looked like it belonged in Scandinavia rather than Los Angeles. A newly installed sign read, "Whitmore Studio." She stepped inside, heart racing, and found Jason seated near the back, hunched over a large sketch pad. He was alone, dressed in a navy sweater and dark jeans, the sleeves pushed up to his elbows, his pencil moving across the page with a meditative kind of grace. He looked up as she approached and smiled, not with surprise or triumph, but with something simpler. Relief. "I got your package," she said quietly, her gaze steady. "And the message?" he asked. She took a breath. "I'm still scared, but not of failing, just of not doing this at all." He stood then and didn't say anything grand or convincing. He simply nodded. "Then let's start." Her office wasn't large. A corner space with one wide window and a glass door, the desk still bare, the walls undecorated. But there was already a nameplate on the door. Leia Hamilton, Creative Director. She touched it once with her fingertips, then noticed the small yellow sticky note taped just beneath it. Written in familiar handwriting were 3 words. Not given. Earned. She swallowed the knot in her throat and pushed open the door. That afternoon, Jason gathered the small team he had assembled. 3 junior designers, 2 project coordinators, 1 engineer fresh out of grad school, and introduced her without ceremony. "This is Leia Hamilton," he said. "She changed the way I see design. She reminded me that good ideas don't care where you come from. They just need someone brave enough to share them and someone honest enough to honor them." Leia's face flushed, but she didn't look down. She met every gaze in the room and saw nothing but respect. After the meeting, Jason placed a small box on her desk and said only, "Open it." Inside was a flash drive. The label, handwritten, said, "Horizon, original files, yours." Underneath it was another note. "You once sold your idea because you thought it was the only way forward. Now you own it, and everything you'll build next." Leia stared at the drive for a long time. Her hand trembled when she finally picked it up. "Thank you," she whispered. Jason shook his head. "Thank you for not letting the world convince you to stay small." She didn't reply right away. Her eyes shimmered, but she blinked it back and turned to her monitor. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone anymore," Jason said gently. "Least of all me. But just so you know, I never chose you out of sympathy. I chose you because long before I saw your face, I saw your mind. And it never let go." Leia looked up slowly. "Then let me prove you right." She returned to her work not out of fear or a need to reclaim, but because the ideas inside her still mattered. And now she had space to let them live. The days that followed passed like current, fast and full and brimming with momentum. She led meetings, reviewed material samples, offered critiques, mentored interns who looked at her the way she used to look at the guest speakers in her lecture halls. Her name began to appear in industry newsletters, design websites, and Instagram posts, not just in footnotes, in headlines. At a networking event, someone whispered, "Isn't she the one who—" and another replied, "She's more than that. She's the one doing this." The media interest didn't fade entirely. People still asked about Caleb, about the scandal, about Eclipse. But Leia had learned how to redirect those questions with grace, her gaze firm and unwavering. Jason never pushed for her time. He gave her space to lead. When they crossed paths in the studio, he greeted her like an equal. He never called her his designer, only our creative director. And yet, she noticed things. The way he always left space for her to walk beside him, never in his shadow. How he never interrupted when she spoke. How he paused before entering her office, even when the door was open. She felt it, growing slowly between them. Not obligation, not rescue. Something else. Something steady. One rainy Tuesday, after a long client pitch that left her exhausted and soaked, she returned to the studio to find a small package on her chair, wrapped in plain brown paper. No name. Inside was a soft, leather-bound journal. White. Unused. The kind artists never buy for themselves because they're afraid to waste pages. She flipped open to the first page. There, in black ink, was a single line. "I can go far, but I would rather stop if that place has you in it." Her breath caught. She sat slowly, the journal warm in her lap. For a long time, she didn't write anything. Then, carefully, she added her response beneath it. "If I go with you, could you slow down a little?" She closed the journal and held it to her chest. The next morning, Jason found it on his desk. He didn't smile right away. He read the words twice, then sat in silence. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like something to endure. It felt like a beginning. The Global Creative Design Center in New York glowed with the kind of reserved grandeur that made even the most seasoned designers stop and breathe in reverence. The event had drawn visionaries from every corner of the world, innovators in eco-architecture, restoration artists, material futurists. Leia stood in the wings of the grand hall, her breath shallow beneath the soft drape of her ivory evening gown. It wasn't a dress she would have chosen for herself. It had been suggested by the studio team, coordinated by interns who insisted she deserved something that moved like she did, quietly, with grace and strength hidden in every stitch. And as much as she had resisted, now, with the fabric brushing her heels and the subtle sheen catching the lights, she felt for the first time as though she belonged in the room. The applause was deafening when her name was called. She walked across the stage with deliberate steps, her head held high, the applause crashing around her like waves. She hadn't rehearsed a speech. She had told herself she would speak only if asked, and only from the truth. She approached the microphone, offered a gentle smile that steadied the room, and said simply, "Thank you." There was a stillness then, a kind of collective leaning forward. "A year ago," she continued, her voice quiet but unwavering, "I thought my dreams lived only in sketchbooks tucked under my bed. I thought they were indulgent, naive, forgotten." She paused, let the truth settle before continuing. "That is, until I picked up the wrong person at LAX. Laughter rippled through the crowd, light and warm, a shared release of tension. There was no fairy tale moment, she said, no lightning bolt, just a man who didn't rush to correct me, a man who listened, who didn't laugh when I spoke about light, structure, and the fear of never being good enough." Her eyes scanned the audience until they found him. Jason. Seated in the front row in a charcoal tuxedo, hands folded neatly in his lap, watching her with the same steady gaze that had anchored her on the worst days. He didn't smile widely or nod dramatically. He simply looked at her as if he had known she would be here long before either of them did. "People often ask me what changed everything," she said, "and I think it was this. Someone saw worth in me before I could see it in myself." The host returned to the stage and invited her to step forward and accept the award, but before she could move, Jason stood. The room quieted instantly. He climbed the few steps to the stage without a microphone, carrying something rolled in parchment paper. Leia turned slightly, confused, her brows furrowing even as her heart skipped ahead of her. He unrolled the paper slowly, revealing a hand-drawn sketch. A house nestled in a forest clearing, sunlight pouring through a semicircular window. Her eyes widened. She recognized the foundational lines. They were hers. But there were additions. Porch beams drawn in his style, lighting fixtures she remembered describing offhand in a conversation weeks ago, a stone path that hadn't existed in any version she had drawn, but felt right. He held it up gently. "Redrive home," he said softly, "a place for two people to begin again." A hushed sound rose in the room, something between an exhale and a sigh. Leia stared at the drawing, then at him. "You once took me to the wrong hotel," he continued, voice low but clear, "but you helped me find the right destination." The audience chuckled, soft and sincere. Then silence fell again as Jason stepped closer and extended his hand, not in proposal, not in performance, but in partnership. "I don't need an assistant," he said. "I don't need a rising star. I need someone to walk beside me, not fast, not loud, just steady, so we can build something that lasts." Leia let out a breath that was part laugh, part sob, not because she was surprised, but because finally, everything felt exactly where it belonged. She didn't answer with words. She stepped forward and embraced him gently, reverently, there on the stage, under the lights, in front of every face that had once doubted her, dismissed her, underestimated her. Her arms closed around him not as a grand statement, but as a quiet truth made visible. And when she leaned in to whisper, her voice was sure. "I'm ready. Let's go home." They descended the stage together, hand in hand, walking down the long glowing aisle into a night glittering with possibility. Outside, the city hummed. It was one of those rare evenings where even the air seemed celebratory, buzzing not just with noise, but with meaning. As they passed the old corner store where Leia had once picked up shifts between classes to afford textbook rentals and cheap printer ink, she reached into her clutch and pulled out a crumpled, faded receipt. She held it out between them, smiling softly. "This," she said, voice half mirth, half memory. "I used to think this was worthless. But now I know the most valuable thing on it was never the total. It was the gaze of a stranger who chose to stay." Jason didn't answer immediately. He simply tightened his grip on her hand, grounding her the way he always had, not as a man in power, not as a CEO, but as someone who had seen her clearly from the beginning and chosen to walk beside her rather than ahead. That night, back in their shared studio space in Los Angeles, the team gathered to celebrate. It wasn't formal, nothing glitzy, just a table covered in design journals and half-eaten cupcakes, music playing softly from someone's phone. Leia moved between conversations, sometimes laughing, sometimes listening, always aware of how far she'd come. One of the interns asked to take a photo of her next to the wall where early Horizon sketches had been framed. She agreed, and when she stood there beneath the design that had once been stolen, she no longer saw loss. She saw legacy. Later, Jason found her sitting alone in the small outdoor courtyard behind the studio, the evening quiet around her. "You okay?" he asked. She looked up, eyes bright. "I'm better than okay." He sat beside her, not close enough to intrude, just enough to match her breath. "You know," she said, "there's still a part of me that's waiting for someone to say it was all a fluke, that I got here because of you, that I didn't earn it." Jason didn't flinch. "Do you believe that?" "No," she said after a moment. "Not anymore, but sometimes I hear it anyway." "That voice isn't yours," he said. "It's just an echo of someone who gave up before they ever tried." They sat in silence for a while, letting the city exhale around them. Eventually, she turned to him. "I want to build something permanent, something that outlasts all of this." "You already have," he said, "but I'm ready to build the rest with you." She smiled, this time without hesitation. Then she reached for her journal and opened it to the second page. There, in careful handwriting, she wrote a new line. "Every wall I thought I'd hit was actually a door I hadn't yet learned how to open." Jason watched her write, then added beside it, "Good thing you found your keys." They laughed softly in the dark, the future folding around them like blueprints finally being assembled, not in theory, but in life. And as the lights of Los Angeles twinkled around them, they both knew that for once they weren't chasing something out of reach. They were already home. The studio was quiet in the early morning, lit only by the filtered rays of sun rising over downtown Los Angeles. Inside the main open space, light pooled on long work tables covered in drafting paper, scale models, and ceramic coffee cups half full and forgotten in the rhythm of creative momentum. The scent of pencil graphite and fresh-cut wood mingled with the citrus soap from the communal sink, faint and oddly calming. Leia stood alone at the edge of her office, barefoot, cradling a cup of tea, watching the city begin its day beyond the glass walls of the studio Jason had built and handed her the keys to shape. It had been just over a year since that night in New York. A year since she had stepped onto that stage with trembling hands and walked down from it with a heart steadier than it had ever been. In those 12 months, everything had changed, but not in the dramatic, overnight transformation the media often loved to suggest. The change had been quiet, gradual, earned in long days, stubborn nights, and a growing trust in her own voice. Redrive Studio had become a name people spoke with interest, and then respect. In design expos and urban planning panels, in architecture school lectures and sustainability forums, her name no longer raised eyebrows. It raised expectations, but with success came new shadows. She had grown used to the praise, yes, but also to the curiosity veiled behind politeness. When people asked about the studio, their tone shifted when Jason's name came up. Sometimes it was subtle, sometimes overt. "So, how exactly did you two meet? Is he still involved in your projects? Must be nice to have someone like that backing you. Did he choose you before or after you went public?" Leia always smiled, brushed it off, redirected. Not because she was ashamed, she wasn't, but because every question laced with suspicion chipped away at something she had fought so hard to reclaim: authorship. She knew what they were really asking. Was she talented or just lucky? Was she brilliant or just beloved? Jason never interfered. He never stepped in to silence critics or clarify their history. He gave her space. Let her lead. When the media asked for interviews, he directed them to her. When donors requested meetings, he invited her to speak first. But his presence, however quiet, was always there, and with it, the implication that maybe, just maybe, she was where she was because he had allowed it. She hated that. Not him, but the implication. And yet, in quieter moments, when the studio had emptied for the night and she sat alone drafting the lighting plan for a transitional shelter complex, or when she reread old notes from her student days tucked inside her leather-bound journal, she knew the truth. Jason had opened a door, yes, but she had walked through it alone. He never claimed her, never tried to define her, but sometimes in the stillness she wondered if he was waiting for her to look past the doubt and see what had been growing all along, because something had been growing. She noticed the way he always paused at her door, even now, even when they were alone and the walls no longer required formality. She noticed the way he never interrupted her train of thought, but stayed with her afterward to hear the rest. How he never called her mine, but always said we, and how every we felt like a foundation they hadn't yet drawn blueprints for. Leia knew she cared for him deeply, but she also knew fear of being reduced, fear of giving in too easily, fear of becoming a story instead of writing her own. And so she built her life in careful sections: work, studio, memory, Jason. She left space between each one, afraid of letting the lines blur. Then came the Tuesday she never saw coming. She had just returned from a grueling presentation to a group of city planners, older, skeptical men who seemed more interested in her age and gender than in the community shelter she was proposing. The drive back had been silent. Her coat, damp from the morning drizzle, still clung to her as she entered the studio, throat tight and jaw clenched. She hadn't eaten. She hadn't slept much. All she wanted was quiet. But on her chair was a package. It was small, wrapped in plain brown paper, no ribbon, no label. She stared at it for a full minute before sitting down and tearing through the seam. Inside was a white leather-bound journal, unused, pristine, the kind she had never allowed herself to buy. It was expensive, sacred, meant for someone whose ideas were already valued, not someone still proving herself page by page. She opened to the first line and read what was written there in black ink. "I can go far, but I would rather stop if that place has you in it." She inhaled sharply. Her fingers trembled. Then, slowly, she picked up her pen and wrote below, "If I go with you, could you slow down a little?" She didn't sign it. She didn't need to. The next morning, she found the journal sitting open on Jason's desk. He didn't say anything at first. He simply ran his hand over the page once, carefully, as if the ink might smudge even after it had dried. He looked out the window for a long time before closing the book and placing it in his drawer. That afternoon, neither of them spoke of it. But something had shifted. A week later, the studio hosted a community engagement forum in the back courtyard, an open event for locals to view project models, vote on design elements, and share feedback. It was Leia's idea. She spent the morning walking guests through a model of an adaptive housing unit for displaced families, her voice calm and clear as she explained airflow circulation and flexible spacing. Jason stayed in the background, letting her lead, only stepping forward when a teenager asked for advice on getting into architecture school. He knelt beside her and let her speak first. Later that night, after the event had cleared and the team had gone home, Leia sat in her office staring at the city lights. The skyline looked different now, not just because of time or development, but because she had helped shape it. Tiny pieces, quiet corners, but they were hers. Jason knocked once on the frame before entering. He placed a sketch on her desk. A new structure. Not quite a house, not quite a studio. A shared space. Round windows, open roof beams, a garden wrapping around the side. "I started drawing this a few months ago," he said. "Didn't know where it was going. Then I realized I was waiting for you to fill in the rest." She looked at him. "I'm not asking for anything," he added, "but if you want to draw this with me, I'm ready." She looked at the sketch again. The lines were soft, the structure imperfect, but it felt real. "Let's build it slowly," she said. "No rush, no noise." He smiled. "That's the only way I know how." They stood for a while beside the desk, shoulder to shoulder, the sketch between them like a seed not yet planted. And then, without fanfare, she reached for a pencil and added one line, a sun window facing east. He didn't speak, he just watched. The following weeks unfolded gently. Meetings continued, projects progressed. Their lives remained separate, yet increasingly intertwined. They didn't label anything, they didn't announce, they just kept showing up. People still asked questions, still wondered, but Leia no longer flinched. She had nothing to defend. She was not lucky. She was prepared. She was not chosen. She was seen. The day they broke ground on their new collaborative space, a reporter asked her how it all began. She smiled, remembering the curb at LAX, the wrong Jason Smith, the trembling hands on the steering wheel, the curve of a modular shelf folded into a wall. "I picked up the wrong person," she said, "but I found the right direction." That night, as they walked past the spot where she had once spilled coffee on her shoes before a student critique, Leia pulled out her wallet. Tucked inside was a faded receipt. Barely legible, ink-smudged, corners worn soft with time. "I used to carry this to remind myself that I came from nothing," she said. Jason looked at her. "And now?" She smiled. "Now I know I always had everything I needed. I just had to believe it was worth building." They walked on, side by side, no longer afraid of the distance between steps. They had arrived at the right address. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that even small moments can change everything. And if you're ready for your next journey, watch the next video.